So welcome everyone to our first Collider Spark series. My name is Jamie Sunsbach. The Collider Spark series was conceived of as a way to introduce our community to some brilliant outside voices outside of our community from all over the world who have been doing amazing work that hopefully will spark new ideas and conversations within our own community. Just as a reminder, Collider is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based here in Rochester, Minnesota, whose mission is to help foster an inclusive, diverse, and healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. And today we are so honored to have Natalie Nixon joining us. Natalie is an author, a global speaker, and a consultant. And she's a creativity strategist who I think we'll talk a little bit about the wonder and rigor portion of what she's doing, but she really integrates that, lives it, and breathes it in her life and work. She converted a 16-year career as a professor into a successful consulting practice, which is called Figure Eight Thinking. She emboldens leaders to apply creativity and foresight for transformative business results. I could go on and on. Your bio is very interesting, very awesome. But I just want to say on behalf of everyone here in Rochester, welcome, Natalie. Thank you for taking time to join us today.
Thank you, Jamie. It's a real pleasure to be here. Can't wait for our conversation.
Great. So first, thank you. Well, let me take a step back. Just to remind everyone, if they have questions for Natalie, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. And I and Amanda, who's secretly in the background today, will be screening those questions. You can actually upvote those questions as well. So if you see something that resonates with you, please feel free to upvote. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please submit questions as we go through our conversation here. So first, Natalie, thank you so much for bringing this book into the world. I loved reading it. I'm a big fan of creativity. I was introduced to creative process through a lot of work that the Stanford D School has done, and David Kelly, and so I think this is a great sort of evolution of some of his thinking. So I really believe that with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, that it couldn't have been a better time for your book to come out and inspire so many of us that have literally felt the world shifting and changing underneath us.
That's right.
And I think it's just a perfect time to think about creativity once again. So if we could start with that concept of creativity, what's your definition of creativity?
So thank you for supporting my work. Thank you for reading the book. I really appreciate that. And I define creativity as our capacity to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And then I added on an extended part of the definition, and produce novel value. But it's really about toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I absolutely agree that we need to exercise this capacity, this competency of creativity today more than ever.
So I know a lot of times creativity is something that feels like maybe until you're, maybe in before you get to middle school, maybe at that elementary school level, like kids are so creative. They're so willing to just do amazing things and taking risks and things like that. But it seems like as we get older, that creativity starts to vanish a little bit.
Yeah, it does seem like that.
Yeah. So what, it could be our educational institutions, it could be, businesses, even families in some way, some of that creativity starts to disappear. How do we work with our community to help bring creativity back, start exercising that muscle again?
Well, I agree with you. I do think that we can find the root of its dissipation in our educational system. One of the ways that creativity really thrives and ways that we can exercise is through play. And so we are actually encouraged to learn by doing and to play probably up until about that middle school age. And the cool thing about play is that play is a method of experimentation and discovery. And when you think about all of the skill sets and attributes that are required for play, such as collaboration, negotiation, leading and following, teaming, active listening, intuition, and anticipating what's around the corner, all of these sorts of things are actually really high level executive functioning skills and frankly for executive leadership. So it's really tragic that we have this propensity in our society to think as we get more into the serious stuff of life, there should be less play, less laughter. When we play, things stick. I believe it's part of, there's a bit of a kinesthetic aspect of learning that builds a different type of muscle memory to help us learn. And there's also the application of things. We're actively trying and tinkering and experimenting with things when we play. So I was a professor for 16 years. I taught middle school and high school English for 5 years in my mid-20s in a different chapter of my life. And certainly in my own learning experiences, or I'll say educational experiences, because I think learning and education are two very different things. But my own educational experiences, definitely I experienced that play became diminished in the academic context. I studied dance, so it certainly was a vibrant part of how I learned in the studio model of education. And many, many years later, as a professor, I created and launched the Strategic Design MBA program at Philadelphia University. And one of the signature sensorial design elements of that learning experience, in my view, was because we used the studio model of learning in an MBA setting. Classes were noisy, they were a bit rambunctious, there was a lot of laughter, people were standing up for at least 70% of the time, there was very minimal sage on stage, there was some of that to deliver out content and context. So it's totally possible to integrate that. I think we just have to require that of our educational powers to be. I also think there's no shame in asking for forgiveness and not permission, and just trying a prototype sort of way to test out different models of learning. And positivity is contagious. When kids like it, when learners like it, when it starts to catch on, people want a little bit of that. So I think there's also a bit of I don't want to say inner anarchist, but there has to be a bit of the inner disruptor that or mischievousness that each of us has to try and integrate play into the way we're learning and into the way we're working.
So I love that. It's awesome. So I think you beautifully package your thoughts throughout this book. I love your literary style and how it flows. One thing we talked about briefly here is this idea of wonder and rigor, and the constant sort of cycling or tension between the two that really leads to creativity and ultimately that creativity leap. Could you talk a little bit about that sort of cycling between wonder and rigor, and how you really found, I think, inspiration through your father's love of jazz, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for referencing my dad and jazz music. So before I get into what he taught me so much because of his love for jazz music, just kind of 30,000 foot level, I've identified two corollaries in the way I explain creativity in that flow. You know, the famous psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I'm always messing up his last name, but he was infamous for having, and he's written about many books and incredible TED Talks about the concept of flow. This idea that when we are in a state of flow, it's kind of this limbic state in between consciousness and subconsciousness, and that's when sometimes we even say we're in our groove, right? So the toggling between wonder and rigor is a really somewhat natural concept. It stems from chaotic systems thinking. I ground a lot of my work in chaotic systems thinking, which stems from chaos theory and complexity theory. But the two corollaries I like to reference are that wonder is found in the midst of rigor. So whatever the rigorous task that you think about, for me, it might be filing my taxes or completing a really laborious Excel sheet. That's rigor for me. It's other things for other people. In the midst of that minutia of work, it's often when those like moments happen for me. Sometimes it's just something that's needed to marinate in my brain. So wonder is found in the midst of rigor, and rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. So in my consulting practice at Figure Eight Thinking, a lot of the time I'm hired to help clients build cultures of innovation. Now, some of my colleagues start to refer to that as innovation theater. Sometimes I refer to it as innovation churn. But really what we're referencing is that a lot of the time we're throwing around the word innovation and meaning completely different things. And I would often see that that often clients were mistaking rigidity for rigor, which are not the same thing. So running from meeting to meeting, or just following the rule book, or paying attention to procedure, that's not actually rigor. Rigor is allowing your teams, your folks, for the deep, intensive thought, for the time to develop deep skill and practice on something, which also requires more solo, a bit meditative time, which doesn't happen if you're running from meeting to meeting. And then of course I was rarely seeing space and time set aside for the wonder, for people to dream, to be audacious and ask big blue sky what if questions. We need both to actually get to creativity, which in fact is the engine for the sought after innovation. Creativity is the engine for innovation. What my father was actually teaching me, and he was a big jazz head. He's a product of the late 50s, early 60s, which is really when he was coming of age. And so he had this amazing Blue Note jazz album collection. And I grew up in a home where jazz music, especially from the cool period, was really playing in our home all the time, in addition to my mother's love of classical music. So my mother actually trained to be an opera singer, and she studied voice, and she never actually became an opera singer, but many years later, when she turned 50 years old, she up and learned to play the cello. And my mother is now 80 years old. She'll be 81 in November, and she still plays the cello. So I had a home, a really textured home of music. But my father would just go into the state of kind of inner rhapsody and bliss, listening to what he called his music. And Wynton Marsalis, in an interview I heard recently, he was just reflecting on the death of his dad. He talked about how jazz is really grown folks' music. Young people, kids especially, don't really understand jazz, and I certainly didn't get it. It felt a little discordant sometimes. It felt kind of long a lot of the times. It sometimes lulled me to sleep, especially the cool period of some of those songs and that music. But it was definitely a way for me to cozy up to my dad. And as I became a teenager, I especially started to really appreciate and love jazz music because of what it taught me about my own culture, about African-American culture. And then fast forward a couple decades later, as I'm completing a PhD, I realized that the way I would be able to understand improvisational organizations was actually through the lens of jazz music. So there's a whole group of scholars who study improvisational organizations, and some of them look at it through the lens of theatrical improv, and some look at it through the lens of jazz improv. And so that really, in a lot of ways, I say, brought me full circle back to myself, my family, my culture, as well as helping me to advance professionally.
Yeah, I was so struck by that, how something that, like jazz, like what, how it became such an institution in your family, can strike that chord years later when you're trying to search around for, a thesis, or trying to figure out as you're getting your PhD, and suddenly it's that aha moment that brings all of this together. And I just love that story from the book. So
Thank you. And it was a total aha moment because as you recall, I was struggling. I was in a dark place. I didn't know what my theoretical construct was. And so as my advisor pointed me to this, this space of propositional organizations, that's when I bumped into it again. So it was pretty awesome.
So in my wanderings around the country, I've traveled to a lot of different entrepreneurial ecosystems to sort of understand, kind of embed myself in them, and then bring some of that back to our community here in Rochester. And inevitably, I'm always taken to the innovation center, whether
Right.
it's on a university or a corporate corporation. They always sort of say, hey, look at what we're doing. There's crazy stuff going on. There's robots, there's jugglers. It's, craziness and wonder, and it's fantastic. And I have to thank you so much for really putting into words what I've always kind of felt when I go to those places, which is it always felt to me like a box where
Yeah.
you put, and you sort of say, it's okay to play here,
Right.
but really it should be a cultural sort of, it should be embedded in the culture of the whole organization, this idea of creativity. And it always seems to be contained to that little box. And sometimes it's a showpiece, sometimes there is some cool stuff coming out of it. But I just appreciate some thoughts about that, and why maybe it's more important for it to be um, take it out of the box and spread amongst the whole culture of the organization that this innovation center is supposed to be serving.
Right. And, I definitely understand why it often starts as an innovation center or a lab. I totally get that, especially in storied organizations where there's an established culture, right? Culture change takes time because it requires a shift in mindset, which leads to shifts in behavior, which finally leads to culture change. What we need to do, however, is ensure that we don't get stuck in only having the innovation center be the, as you put it, the place to play, because otherwise we won't do what we set out to do, which is to infuse the entire organization and give agency to everyone to figure out their own je ne sais quoi about how they are innovating, applying creativity, whether they work in accounting or manufacturing or sales or marketing. But we're already seeing kind of this language. I just listed a bunch of divisions, a bunch of silos in the organization. When I was on faculty at Philadelphia University, we did a really cool experiment where we went from being a university consisting of how many? I think it was like 6 or 7 colleges to one consisting of 3. And I became a member of the DEC College, the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce. And some of my colleagues fought that kicking and screaming, and others of us really embraced it. It was hard to figure out how are we going to have a matrix approach to learning. Who would have thought could have co-teaching and collaborative teaching versus a singular font of knowledge in the classroom. A place where I've seen, still talking in the education side, where I've seen the messiness of creativity and innovation kind of disperse a bit better is at Aalto University in Finland, in Helsinki, where they have an entire building that is all about hacking and exploration and discovery. In our corporate environments, it's a lot harder. So sometimes we'll see that the innovation centers totally go off the campus and they're like miles away. Other times they're in a room or a floor. But what can quickly happen is that becomes the place where you go to play with Post-its, which is really a diminionization of the rigorousness of the rigor and how hefty and lofty a prospect this is to build a culture of innovation. So it requires steadfast leadership and buy-in from top down to ensure that people really build, if I dare say it myself, what I call the 3 I's, that they really become, which are inquiry, improvisation, and intuition, that they really build this curiosity muscle to get outside their comfort zone, learn a bit, and then embed it and start playing around with it. And the friends and colleagues I have who are leading these innovation centers, they know this. They are as frustrated as anyone else that they don't want it to be contained in that space. It's a starting place, but it really ultimately needs to be diffused throughout the organization.
Yeah, and I always say that here in Minnesota we are the home of 3M, and I always feel like 3M should be sponsoring every one of these innovation centers, because
Yes.
there is I mean, you shake an innovation center and Post-its are flying everywhere. So it's good business for Minnesota. So I give them that. But
That's a great idea.
totally agree. I mean, it's you need to, eventually it has to work its way out of that box. So um, speaking of that, I think we have one more question that I've come up with, and then we will turn the audience loose. So I think my last question is, there's a lot in the book, and I highly encourage everybody to read it. But there's a lot of what you talk about communing together, finding your tribe, as Seth Godin would say, but then having these tribes sort of start to commune together in order to really create that creativity leap. So the one thing that I think, especially now, because I feel like it's been sped up due to just all the craziness that's going on in the world, is you talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, and why creativity doesn't need to just be an add-on, but an essential skill for everyone in the future if we're going to embrace this fourth industrial revolution. So could you talk a little bit about what the fourth industrial revolution is, and why creativity is so important as we move forward in the future?
Sure. So the fourth industrial revolution is this the simple direct way I can say is that it's characterized by the cloud. The fourth industrial revolution is where technology is ubiquitous. If the first industrial revolution was characterized by another cloud, steam, steam technology, and then the second by I guess electronics, and then the third no, it was the second was, I'm getting my second and third confused, but by electronics and computers, and then finally cloud technology now. So we see it, for example, I have on my desk the A lady from Amazon. I want to say Alexa too loudly because it will start to like hum alive. But that's a form of augmented reality. The fact that if we don't know the answer to a question or don't know the definition for a word, we Google it. That's artificial intelligence active all the time. So many surgeries now are being directed by human being surgeons, but through robots. So the surgeon is in a room 50 yards away, and the robot is actually doing the surgical procedure. So technology is everywhere, and so there is one view of this world, this reality that's really a dystopia, run for the hills, the robots are taking over. There's another view that's a bit of a utopia, like finally we have technology to solve all our ills, don't worry about it. And what's really much more of a reality is what my friend and colleague Galit Ariel calls a heterotopia. It's a little bit of both. The opportunity in this fourth industrial revolution and in the future of work is that there's actually going to be more space and room for the human to show up, because of the fact that anything that's task related will be replaced by robots and AI, et cetera, right? What that means is the silver lining, in my view, is that we actually now have the opportunity for the human competencies to shine and to really ensure that at the end of the day, the algorithm has a human at either side of it. There's a person who has to ask a better question to design the algorithm, and there's people who reap the benefits of that algorithm. So I think that the future of work is there's going to be casualties, and I think that the sooner that we can equip our children, get more comfortable ourselves with embracing the creativity that is inherent in each of us by toggling between wonder and rigor. And you could read my book and get lots of good tips and all that sort of stuff for it as well. The sooner we embrace that, the better. And listen, the COVID-19 quarantine, while it is driving parents crazy with how they're trying to balance work and taking care of their children, and Lord knows in the fall, balancing out hybrid education, there could be some really cool discoveries and learnings and opportunities of different ways to really lean into learning versus the strictures of education, right? And hopefully to see that what ways and possibilities there are for our kids to learn by doing. I have been advertising and predicting for quite some time now that we're going to see a return to the apprenticeship model. Not the apprenticeships of the medieval times, but more of an embrace of learning by doing. We're seeing more and more blurred boundaries between corporations and education. More companies are even have been starting their own universities and their own opportunities for people to learn. And especially coming out of COVID, more institutions of higher education are going to need to find really cool, interesting, creative partnerships with industry to enhance what they do.
Yep. Love it. Awesome. All right, let's open it up to, this is always where it scares me. Like, let's open it up to questions, and then you got to actually filter questions. So I will look briefly through this. I was trying to not get too distracted. I might take these a little bit out of order. So Jocelyn has a good question here. How do you inject play during COVID times? It's really difficult. So if you have any ideas, she has a small team of healthcare providers, and they're still working on site, wearing masks, social distancing, and taking care of our patients. But it's a very challenging time where maybe people are more separated than they used to be. So how would you inject some ideas to inject play during this trying time?
Well, it sounds like from Jocelyn's example that because they're healthcare providers, they actually, I'm making an assumption that they are not working remotely, that they actually are on site, sounds like taking care of patients. This is actually advice that I give in general. One of the principles of wonder is about pausing. And I know everyone has excuses about why they possibly cannot pause, why they cannot take breaks. But breaks are essential. So if you can gamify by incentivizing your team to take breaks, maybe there's a point system and I don't know, cookies or jelly beans or something at the end of the day for someone who's logged in the most. I take, for example, daydream breaks. And I'm not talking 30 minutes away from, the task at hand. I'm talking about 5 minutes, sometimes 90 seconds. If it's cold outside, I'll stand by the window, put my handy dandy timer on with my smartphone, and I will let my mind wander. And there's also just the reality for healthcare workers. I was just talking to a friend today. He has a friend who's a dentist. His friend is a dentist, is like 55 years old, healthy guy, exercises, works out. In his dentistry practice now, he has to wear the cloth mask, and he also has to wear, I'm sorry, I don't know the proper name for it, but it's the kind of clear plastic shield mask. Mm-hmm. And he's been realizing at the end of each day, he is exhausted, and he's starting to put together, he thinks it's because of limited oxygen that he's getting. And it's like, oh my God, of course, how could you be getting as much oxygen? So what if, just suspend judgment for a moment, but what if you as a leader just started to require of your team that let's ease our way into it, for every hour of work, 55 minutes in an hour, 5 minutes, you can just step outside and you can just breathe in fresh air. You can look up at the sky, whether it's cloudy or sunny. We, as humans, we are organic creatures, and we have to get out the friggin' building sometimes. So that is one idea that I have. And I'm starting to lose patience when clients and people respond, oh, we're too busy to do that. It's just too much of a workload. You know what? We have to start building new boundaries. We must redesign our relationship with time. And in the beginning of COVID, everyone was remarking, oh, this is like Groundhog Day. People were flipping out because all of a sudden we actually had this agency and this license to reconstruct our day, which might be in the form of new and different rituals, right? Instead, I think it's probably a law of physics or chemistry or something, like energy fills a void. So the space and time has just been filled with more Zoom-palooza meetings and such. We can create the boundaries. And then the response is, oh, but what if the client needs to meet? Let's say the boundary is, okay, guys, we're going to ease our way into this and say, Tuesdays, we will only have Zoom meetings between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So before 10 a.m., you can nap, you can play with your kids, you can eat, you can read. After 2, you can do maybe more heads down work, whatever you need to do. And the rest of the days, we'll do the grind. But treat it as an experiment and create those boundaries. And you would be shocked how clients begin to fall in line. But whatever that boundary is that you can afford in your work, please do it. I was also really inspired by reading the work of Greg McKeown, Essentialism, and he really harps on this, the necessity to really build boundaries once you identify what matters to you. So if it matters to have well-being and health as a healthcare provider, figure out how to do that for your team. I am passionate about saying that I think our lives depend on it. We have got to start making those boundaries and take breaks.
Great, thank you. Al has a question. So I think we all know about Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. So his question is, does creativity require practice? Play seems to imply one can be creative without hard work.
Oh gosh, no. That's why I was really deliberate in my definition of creativity to say that it's about toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. Creativity is not just pulling something randomly out of your armpit. We romanticize the work of artists when we ghettoize creativity and the arts. That's not fair to artists, and it's not beneficial to our society at large. Any person who has pursued a practice in the arts, who is a professional artist, understands the amount of discipline, time on task, repetitive learning of fundamentals, knowing the rules so that you can stretch and rebound out of them. So I'm not sure if I said this earlier, but wonder is about audacity, awe, pausing, asking big blue sky, what if, audacious questions. Rigor is about time on task, discipline, deep skill development. Rigor is often very solitary work. It's often not sexy, and it is absolutely essential. So creativity is full of those light moments of wonder and surprise, and it absolutely is about grinding it out. It requires a lot of unsexy time. That's not fun, but you get up every day and you do it. And that in response to the last question, I mentioned ritual. Ritual is super important to fall in love with process in order to get to that level of mastery. But creativity absolutely requires both the rigor and the wonder.
And I think too, on this topic, you have a card game that you've developed.
Yeah.
And so could you tell us a little bit about that? That may be something that groups could use to really explore that wonder rigor dynamic.
Thank you for referencing that. Yeah, I have a card game. Actually, hang on, let me just show you right here. It's a deck. It's called the Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck, and I actually created the Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck. I launched it probably 18 months before I wrote the book. The reason why I created the card game, I was trying to figure out a way to help my clients engage with this idea of wonder and rigor in order to get to discovery and to disrupt a process and to do a lot of self-reflexive work. And play helps things stick. So the card game is a series of question prompts. Like any good strategist worth her salt, I created a 2x2 matrix, kind of plotting out 4 domains of wonder and rigor. And I went through about 4 prototypes of the game before I actually bundled it and started selling it. And I wanted to ensure that people, one of the things I learned in the process of prototyping, and as I was getting feedback, I tested it with folks from IBM Design, a group of institutional development leaders, fundraisers at colleges and universities, a group of engineers at Pennovation. They were a hard crowd. Each time I would get really helpful feedback about what wasn't landing, where people were confusing things that I hadn't intended. So one of the things, for example, was that the 4 domains, the help that I offer up as ways to identify, based on the problem you're trying to solve, how much wonder do you need to add into the process, how much rigor, how could you add in more wonder and rigor. The domains have names as specializing, hacking, provoking, and inventing. And in the beginning, I didn't use them as verbs. I had them structured as nouns. So it was hacker, provocateur, inventor, specialist. And people, I would overhear, and people would say, "Oh, I'm a specialist," or "I'm a hacker," or "I'm a provocateur." And they were, and I think even in an early version, I called them archetypes, which, understandably, people were owning that label. I'm not a psychologist. This is not Myers-Briggs. The purpose is to really understand those 4 domains as lenses through which you can see your work differently. So yeah, the card game is a lot of fun. And I get feedback now that people use it around the dinner table. They use it just to like strike up, they'll pull out a card randomly just to see what it provokes. So it's all good to me.
Great. Yeah, that's I got to get one. I think we could use it around our co-working space for sure.
Oh, that'd be fun. How it goes.
So another question here from AJ. What are the top 3 rituals that we could start tomorrow for expanding creativity in our daily routine?
Well, the first example I'll say is to design your own ritual. And I actually have done that since the start of COVID. So I've designed and I'm talking from the personal, but I do believe there's a connection between the personal and how we show up at work. I designed a new morning ritual, which requires me to be going to sleep by 10 p.m., which was a big change for me because I would definitely get down the Netflix rabbit hole. Be up at 6 a.m., so getting a full 8 hours of sleep. Between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., I do my morning ablutions and hygiene. I pray, meditate, and I have a gratitude journal. And then I stretch my body for a good 15 minutes. And then I start my day. And one of the biggest gifts of this ritual is it's like a pat on the back. It's a promise I keeping to myself. And it just puts me in a really good frame of mind. It's my way of redesigning my relationship with time. So maybe a challenge to your team could be, what's a ritual, guys, that we could create that would help us redesign our relationship with time? Because really what's changed, one of the many things that's changed in COVID is that we don't have the same markers to identify time. Like every Wednesday, I know I would have lunch at the taco truck, right? That's gone. Or I would always know I would see so-and-so on the commute. And so that's kind of adding to that feeling of loss. And so so redesigning relationship with time at work is a really good one. Also, I don't know if I'd call this a ritual, but what's something that you could learn and become, as what I like to say, a clumsy student of something. So while I continue to be a student of dance, and most lately I'm a student of the foxtrot and tango, I also have started to learn how to pickle vegetables. My stepdaughter gifted me the pickling jars for Mother's Day, and I let it sit for 6 weeks. I was actually a little nervous. I just went and say it out loud. I was like, maybe I'll mess it up. Anyone who pickles knows, it's one of the easiest things you could do. The proportions are super simple and you can play. I've pickled zucchini and carrots and broccoli and onions. Now, the first mistake I made was the first time I pickled red cabbage, broccoli, and carrots, and there was maybe celery was in there too. But I put all the chopped vegetables all in the same 3 jars. So 2 days later, everything was magenta because of the red cabbage. So I learned that I will, from now on, pickle each kind of vegetable in its own little jar. So learning can become a different type of ritual. And I can't think of a third right off the top of my head right now.
I think those are great suggestions, and definitely you gotta be the clumsy student. I love that analogy in the book, and that's it's looking back. You know, there's a lot of things that I've started doing that, you know, it does really help. It does help broaden your horizons. I feel a lot more creative. I got to try the pickling thing though. That's something that I've yet to do. So we'll see what happens.
What have you tried to do lately, Jamie?
Um, I've tried a couple of things. One was to do, as odd as this sounds, just to learn more about how to do video production. You know, I don't feel like I haven't had an eye as like a photographer or videographer or things like that. So I, you know, bought myself a good camera, and I'm just starting to play and try things. And it's been very rewarding. Like, I could come home, I could do it as a family activity. We could go out, we could walk around, we can explore. And it's just been it's brought a lot of joy to my life. So I
I
really
love
love it.
that. That actually, your example, actually, I guess maybe I do have a third example for that question, which is that another ritual that I've added in is I started committing to posting 2 videos a week on social media, on LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. I am not a digital native. I am a solidly Gen Xer. So what's really cool about this ritual and this commitment to just putting stuff out there in a medium that, you know, more and more of us are going to learn and to get content. I would say during May, which is April, May is when I really started to like say, okay, I'm going to do this. I would do 4, 5 takes of something that was like 45 seconds long or 70 seconds long, like not long stuff. And I was always trying to stage stuff and figure out the best angle. And if I said, I would start all over again. Now I realized, especially the other thing I would do, I would start looking at other people who I admire, their Instagram channels and the way they post things. And I realized the more human and personable and goofball-y I am, which is just who I am, it's fine. And those are the ones I like seeing from people. So now I never do a second take. What comes out, and I post it. And so that is something that's very new for me. Some weeks I only get 1 out, but at least I'm getting 1 out a week. My goal is 2 a week. If I can get 3, that'd be amazing. But yeah, that's another new thing that I've started to do. And if for any of you who are entrepreneurs, definitely engage with that, because it really helps you to have conversations with your clients, if your potential clients. It helps you to build your thought leadership. It helps people to get a peek into who you are, because that's we 90% of business is relationships. So when people are choosing to work with you, they want to get a sense of what makes you tick. What are you into? What have you read lately? And that's the kind of stuff I share about.
Okay, I have a selfish question. What's it like to be interviewed by Seth Godin?
Oh yeah, that was amazing. So Seth Godin is someone who I have admired from afar for many, many years. So first of all, what it was like was exceeded expectations. It was the bow on the gift box of my book launch week, because I had to practice what I preach for my book launch. Given that my original plan was a party on the rooftop of the Free Library of Philadelphia, and that wasn't going to happen. That would have been a nice celebration, but it would have been super local. I ended up having collaborative conversations with people that extended my reach and who I touch and who got to hear about the book, because I talked with John Maeda, who is the chief experience officer at Publicis Sapient. He is this amazing guru at the intersection of tech and design. Talked with Galit Ariel, the AR expert who's based in Toronto, with Fei Wu, who's a digital marketing expert, with King Britt, this fabulous global DJ who's now a professor of electronic music. I did a coffee in the morning, lunchtime chat, and cocktails in the evening with King. And then topped it all off with Seth Godin. And he's super personable, super easy to speak with, and very curious and very supportive. And I was just super appreciative that he shared his platform with me. The way we met was 4 years ago in not a Holiday Inn, but like a Marriott off of like exit 72A in New Jersey. There was a company that was having an offsite retreat for their clients. And Seth was the headliner, of course, and I was one of the speakers. I went right after Seth, and Seth like came in, did his talk, and left. Of course, when I saw that he was going to be headliner, I was like, oh my God, Seth Godin. And right as he was packing up his laptop, I went up to him and I said hello, and I asked, could I follow up with him? Because at the time I had edited a book on called Strategic Design Thinking. I said, I'd love to send you my book. He's like, sure. He's like, and I think he gave me his email. I followed up. He said, sure, send me your book. I sent him my book, and he had a couple of edits for me. There were a couple of things I had missed. He actually read through the book. And we became like email chats once a year, something like that, nothing deep at all. So when I reached out to him and I said, there's nothing like launching a book during a pandemic. Would you be open to a conversation with me? He flipped it around and said, hey, I do these IG Live, or it was Facebook Live and LinkedIn Live. How about I talk to you? And so it was super, what I call professionally generous, and really deeply appreciated that.
Yeah. Yeah. If it wasn't for Seth, I don't think there'd be the Collider in the way it is right now. Many years ago, we ran a Krypton course. That was something that Seth does, and that really informed us in our community, what we need going forward, and really empowered a lot of us to really take some big leaps in our lives and make some changes that ultimately, I think, for a lot of those attendees, it amounted to something amazing. And I think you were just interviewed by Travis Wilson too.
Yes.
Do you see how creepy I am? Like, I've researched like everything.
No.
Now, Travis is a friend, and Travis actually taught that original Krypton course here in Rochester. So,
wow, he's great.
Weird connections.
He's
fantastic. So that is my questions. I want to make sure before anyone leaves, please don't jump off right now. I know at the end of Zoom meetings, people tend to do that. But thank you for all the great questions, everyone. And, thanks so much, Natalie, for taking the time to share your thoughts, your insights with us today. Her book, if you hold it up to Creativity Leap, is available everywhere. And this is my one Oprah moment of my life. So if you can all virtually go and pretend to reach under your chair and grab an Imaginarium book and pull it out, courtesy of AJ Monpettit from Workshop, he has actually purchased every single person in this webinar their own copy of Natalie's book.
Thank you, AJ. That's so awesome of you. Thank you.
It is super awesome. So we'll be contacting you all via email and getting that sent out to you as soon as the books come in, which I think you'll all have a copy in hand probably in the next couple of weeks. So again, Natalie, thank you for taking the time. You're wonderful. I can't express how grateful we are to have you spend a little bit of time with us today.
Well, I'm super appreciative of you guys sharing your platform. Thank you for all the great questions, Jamie. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And yes, spread the wonder and rigor, spread the word. We got to take some creativity leaps.
Absolutely. So you could find a recording of today's event on Collider's YouTube page. It should go up tomorrow. I always tell people, when you're looking for Collider's YouTube page, search Collider Rochester or Collider Minnesota. Collider is a very popular online movie site that does movie reviews and stuff like that. So sometimes you get directed there. So definitely throw in Minnesota or Rochester. This discussion will also appear on Rochester Rising, which is our online news platform. And I'm guessing Amanda will throw it into a podcast at some point here in the upcoming weeks. So you can consume this again, whether it's video or audio. So thank you all for joining us today, and go get creative. I mean, why not? Be creative for the next 5 minutes. Have fun. Take care, everyone.